All right, as the final video of this series, I want to briefly touch on some of the more important formatting nuances from the previous videos. First, in the header, you'll notice the list of nations. I want to modify this. Delegates should insist that the nations be listed alphabetically. There are delegates who may find it favorable to be listed first, or perhaps the nations in order of amount of contribution. As a group, you'll determine how you want to go about this, but I definitely recommend you insist for alphabetically. The reason for this is delegates won't feel excluded or overwhelmed by the power dynamics, and it's just far more professional to maintain. Lucky for us, the sponsors are already in alphabetical order, but our signatories are not. So I'm going to go ahead and change that real quick. And United Kingdom and Zambia. Another important note is in the case of the United Kingdom and other countries that have abbreviations, you don't want to do UK. You want to write out their full name. It's just far more respectful to them. They may not care that much, but it's just to keep it very universal and really acknowledge that everyone's here as an equal power. When you're drafting these papers, it should be read as one long sentence without any periods or disrupting punctuation. The guide on the crash course document better explains this, but keep in mind that as done here, no one clause has a period ending it. So we're not saying that it's a human rights violation, period. We're not ending anything. It should go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and so forth. There are times where you'll be using colons or semicolons if you feel comfortable using that kind of punctuation. Not everybody does. It's not a huge deal. Some people are more grammar Nazi than others. Just be open to whatever makes your paper look with a stronger format. Additionally, something else I want to also mention is the importance of research. This exercise works because a lot of information is provided in the discussion, which could totally be applicable to a day in committee. But one of the best ways to keep everyone on their toes is to have more research than all of them. For example, when I was building this working paper, I needed to pull from previous experiences. Honestly, this is exactly how committee will be. There will be good delegates with a lot of experience, but there will be some with more research. The goal is to be both and not rely on just one or the other. Some common mistakes to keep in mind is to avoid calling out any countries in particular. For example, I believe it was in this one where I mentioned Western powers. A little bit of a typo. I can fix that right now. And Western normativity. Especially if you're mentioning something in a negative way, do not specifically call out anyone in particular. Do not say specifically the United States or the France or the UK. Another example that is a little relevant is, at least in the case of child marriages for this paper, is don't call out specifically Pakistan or other countries who are vulnerable to child marriages, regardless of their position in the committee. You can say vulnerable populations. You can even target a region. You have to be able to address this indirectly and diplomatically, usually by mentioning those regional hints or cultural norms without calling out anyone in particular. There are many times where a state feels their sovereignty is threatened. By your paper, we mentioned that again, sovereign rights as a nation and a culture. Although this is important to consider when developing your paper, you pretty much don't have to worry about including it in an operative clause, but make sure you develop it in speeches or explain in subclauses why your paper isn't a violation of sovereignty. You can often do this by emphasizing vulnerable populations and begin generally what affected groups or people you want to consider. In contrast, you can be vague about which countries are causing the issues for other countries without saying specifically, the United States oppressed Venezuela, or any examples such as that. Keep in mind the who and the whens of your committee. Historical committees may be slightly different. If you're in one that takes place in the Cold War, it's going to have a completely different feel to it. Just be diplomatic. Keep that in mind. and people like it when you address sovereignty. Another note is normally working papers and draft resolutions could be very lengthy and far more detailed than this. But for the purpose of practice or drafting, this is acceptable. We've included the ideas of pretty much everyone in the scenario, but there may be some things you caught that didn't make it in. This is because there are different sets of important ideas to each country and each person. Listen to everyone and do what you can to be thorough. Lastly, I want to touch on the difference between a working paper and a draft resolution. That is, at this point in our exercise, our paper was called a working paper. That is until the chair accepts it as a draft resolution. During the first part of your committee, you'll experience your working paper may look something like this, with broad and short ideas that are going to be built on throughout the committee. Once the chair has accepted it, at least in the case, once the chair has accepted it, they will announce and even put in draft resolution 1.2 as it was in this exercise. And it would just say draft resolution 1.2, and it would no longer have that working paper title. A draft resolution is a little more formal, and you'll have more time to develop it until it's voted on and either becomes a resolution or gets rejected. What this means is when working on, say, paper ABC, it's submitted to the chair, then this draft resolution would be added here. Sometimes they prefer to add it down here. It's really up to the chair's discretion. They do it themselves. If they don't do it and they just announce it without saying anything, you can go ahead and put it right there at the top. And it looks like we've concluded all of our videos. I hope this has really helped you, if not developed your ideas for an upcoming conference, and perhaps had gave you a more firm grasp on formatting techniques. So good luck, guys.